Hospital Porter's Pride and Dignity, Stop the New World Order. Welcome to Panwo TV, and welcome to yet another reply video to the one and only Stefan Molyneux. Yeah, I've been a while since I did one. The last one was about ayahuasca, which was back in March last year, so it's been close to a year now. 9 months, you know. It's a good video to start the new year off with. The UFO disclosure one is coming. I know I always say that, but I have got it planned. It's a bit later than usual, but so I thought I'd do this one first. In fact, even though it's been 9 months since the last Stefan Molyneux reply video, I've actually had this one on the back burner for months. I planned to do it, and I wrote out some notes and things like that, and I collected some audio. I think soon after the last one, or even maybe before the last one. So I've had this on the back burner for close to a year now. So it's quite good to get it out the way, actually, to get it done. I just saw it sit. I had to move the folder to my new 2022 folder. I thought I want to get this out of the way. But anyway, this is not only the obviously the last Stefan Molyneux reply video was ayahuasca, but this is a second reply about a subject I've talked about with him before, or I've addressed in the things he said before, and done reply videos to him on a subject he's done before, which is the afterlife. And in the description box you will find a link both to the previous Stefan Molyneux reply video, but also the previous afterlife video reply that I did to Stefan Molyneux about the afterlife. Now, Molyneux has I suppose, a skeptical attitude to this subject, and we're gonna go through some of the points that he makes one by one in a series of 4 videos. This is going to be quite a long, 4 recordings from Molyneux. This is going to be quite a long video. I might have to make it a 2-parter. We'll wait and see. And I'll be addressing all the points he makes in the same way I did on my previous reply videos. As you know from the previous one, he has a skeptical attitude towards this particular subject, and so I think it should be addressed from my perspective, which is a non-skeptical position, which means I'm going to be essentially debating with him on this. Funnily enough, I know that he watches my videos, because he made a comment to one of his videos, a witticism that I had used. I used it on my 9/11 one, so I know that Molyneux watches my videos. So, Stefan, if you're watching, thanks for tuning in, mate. Stefan Molyneux is a popular internet philosopher. He's been around for quite a long time, actually. He started around the same time that I did, and he claims to be the top philosophy website in the world, and the top podcast for philosophy in the world, which is good for him. He does it full time. I respect what he does. I've even sent him a few donations. I've read a couple of his books and listened to one of his audio books. It's pretty good. And my attitude towards him is a mixture of respect and admiration and disagreement, because he gets a lot wrong. He gets a lot of things right, but he gets a lot of things wrong as well. And this is one of them. I have edited it slightly. What you're about to hear is edited. I have cut highlights out of the 4 shows, but it's not to misrepresent Stefan. I don't believe I have done any editing to misrepresent what Stefan said. I mean, Steph can listen himself, and he may disagree, but I think you'll find I haven't done that. I've only edited it for brevity. Molyneux has a habit of rambling a bit. He'll often when he wants to make a point, he'll use about 10 different metaphors to make the same point, as I said on previous videos in this series. So I tend to just cut one of them out, and then I cut one of them out, use it in my reply videos, and then just delete all the rest. So we will begin, which is the first program on the list, and there are actually links in the show notes, in the description box, to all of the 4 videos I'm talking about here. Now, the first one is Free Domain Radio, program 643. Now, it's a long one. It's like a long 2-hour call-in show, maybe even longer than 2 hours. I'm not sure. But the interesting bit which I want to talk about starts 1 hour 30 in. So if you go to the description box and you click on the link to that radio show, you can hear it unedited, with all its rambling glory, without any of me sticking in and saying, get a move on, Steph, I'm only going to use this bit. But also, I'm giving you a timestamp. It's 1 hour 30 minutes in is when the interesting bit starts. So what I've done is, as before, I have a jingle. Now, the jingle, of course, is what is used to designate a point in the narrative where I have to stop the recording and address something from my list of notes. With Christy Winters, it was the mooing of a cow, which was a complete coincidence, I assure you. There's been several others I've used. I used Terence McKenna for the show I did about ayahuasca, replying to Stefan. So what have I got for this particular show? What is the jingle? Well, let's have a listen. Oh, I think that's the wrong one. Let's have a listen to the jingle. One moment.
We know we're going to die, and there is a kind of nobility in facing up to a truth, even if it is bleak. And this is the only life we've got.
It is, of course, old Dickie Dawkins, the one and only Dickie Dawkins. Yes, it's Dawkins. That's actually from a program. That's a recording I clipped out of a program called Secular Believers. I trimmed it down a little bit for brevity as well. If you watch this channel regularly, you'll be familiar with that particular little bit of audio because it appears in another video that I've done. A video called it's called Richard Dawkins MBA Criminal. I won't put a link in the description box of that, but you can go and find it. It's on my channel. It's just a short video, just about 5 minutes long. And because that particular bit of audio I think is very interesting. And I think it kind of sums up very much what this video is about. I try to choose notifications. I try to choose these notification audios which match the theme of what I'm talking about. So, with no further ado, the first one is actually, I made a mistake before. The first one is actually Free Domain Radio, program 643. I've not got them in quite the right order. Apologies for that. So, let's start with program 643. So, here we go. I'll skip the... Okay, so let's hear it from old Steph. Take it away, my man.
That doesn't mean that, well, for example, I teach...
All right, so I should give a bit of background to this. Okay, I didn't really give enough background. What we're listening to is somebody calls in to Steph's show. This lady is a psychic medium. Her voice is very interesting, actually, and some of the things she said made me think it might have been Shirley Bolstock. I actually wrote to the late Shirley Bolstock and asked her, and she said no. But she's an interesting lady. She's a psychic medium from a Jewish family. And she does past life regressions and things like that. So it's really going to rear Steph up, that is. So let's listen to the Steph bot get his goats. The big chatty forehead is going to get very red with rage. Here we go.
That doesn't mean that, well, for example, I teach metaphysics. I work with past life regression. And when I see somebody playing the piano absolutely beautifully who never had a lesson in his life and couldn't play chopsticks before we did the regression, and I've seen this on a number of occasions, to me there's, what kind of explanation am I going to give for that? I cut with Occam's razor. It seems like when we brought back a life where they were a concert pianist and they became a concert-level pianist with no lessons and no abilities in this life, how do you want to explain that?
We know we're going to die, and there is a kind of nobility in facing up to a truth, even if it is bleak. And this is the only life we've got.
So, firstly, I should point out that's a typical thing that past life regressionists often say. They'll say that people will often learn things from their regression experiences, things they couldn't have learned any other way. I do find it amusing, actually, because she brings up Occam's razor. Now, Skeppers absolutely hate it when we, woo-woos, culturally appropriate their favourite knickknacks. Now, Occam's razor, of course, all things being equal, the most likely explanation is usually the right one, is one of their little hobby horses, one of their little issues, one of the things they love to wave in our faces. They sock 'em with the Occam. And this lady has quite correctly applied it to her own thesis. So, what's Stefan going to say about that?
Well, and of course. I work with
Sorry, go ahead.
Telepathy, astral projection. I had somebody last week that was able to get 50% of the the cards that I was sending them, and chance would have allowed only for 20%. Now, obviously this person was showing an ability that can't be explained by perhaps your empirical. Actually, it is empirically explainable, because how else do you explain that I kept score on this and it happened?
Well, that's correct. It's a myth that, I'm just pausing it now in between the sets, it's a myth that somehow this kind of thing is just not scientific. And that'll come up later on in this video.
I sat right there and kept score on it, and it happened. They went from an average of 20% when we started to 50% by the end, with cards that were completely shuffled, and they were at the other end of a phone line. There was no way they could have seen what I was doing.
We know we're going to die, and there is a kind of nobility in facing up to a truth, even if it is bleak. And this is the only life we've got.
So, see, this is exactly what she's done. I mean, evidence, this is an important point. Evidence for psi does exist. Psi is short for parapsychology. It's the subject talked about by parapsychology. And Stefan, I think, is going to claim it doesn't. And the fact is it does. And so that's the second one. I'm just checking over. That's it, right. So that's the second one. So I'm just making sure I've got my notes in the right order. That's just the point I wanted to make with this particular little set of the audio.
Right. Well, there's two responses, if you can just indulge me for a second. There's sort of two responses that pop into my mind about this, and forgive me for being, blunt about one of them. But the first is that if there is such a capacity that human mind has, let's just say that there is a potential that our human mind, through some quantum flux weirdness that we can't even conceive of very easily.
Quantum flux weirdness, that sounds like the name of a new car, Quantum flux weirdness from Austin Rover.
That we can share each other's thoughts and impressions over long periods of distances. Certainly within science they have shown the ability for subatomic particles to affect each other across large distances instantaneously. So let's say that there is some capacity to verify the kinds of phenomenon that you're describing. That, to me, would simply be something that would need to be investigated through the scientific method to figure out what was going on.
We know we're going to die, and there is a kind of nobility in facing up to a truth, even if it is bleak. And this is the only life we've got.
But that's what she's done. He says these things have to be examined scientifically. Well, that's what she's done. That's what she's done. I don't get it. Why Stefan is making that point. It's like she says something and he says, "Oh, but you haven't done it this way," and she's just done it exactly as he was suggesting.
So
it's been extensively investigated through the scientific method.
Exactly.
Rand Institute. There's a whole number of institutes that have investigated this at great length. If you go to the Theosophical Studies Center, you will see stacks of empirical information on the subject.
I should point out the Rand Corporation was closely involved with Stanford Research Institute. It's a long story, but their work is very, very interesting indeed.
Right, so this
Literally
is something that we can
stacks.
study as a property of matter, and a truly fascinating, if it's true, right, a truly fascinating capacity of the human mind. This would be something that we would study through the investigation of matter and energy. To me, that opens up a whole wide and very interesting series of questions, which I'm certainly no physicist or biologist and not even remotely competent to answer. So for me, that's some amazing
Well, I've been
stuff.
doing this since 1969 and teaching metaphysics since 1969. Probably I know something about it.
Well, sure, absolutely.
Correct.
And you know something about it as something that you have witnessed and that you describe within your life and so on. Now, that's something that, and there's one of two possibilities, and you'll forgive me for being blunt, and I'm not suggesting anything. The one possibility is that you're not telling me the truth, right? And again, I apologize for all of that. This is just looking at it
I have this all recorded.
Right? Yeah, no, absolutely.
I record sessions.
I understand that, and I'm not accusing you of lying. I'm just saying that from my perspective, if I sort of hear stuff that sounds improbable to me, right? And I've done some research on this myself, and
We know we're going to die, and there is a kind of nobility in facing up to a truth, even if it is bleak. And this is the only life we've got.
So, I must say, Stefan, he does give people a fair hearing. He doesn't just mouth off. I mean, if this had been Professor Brian Cox, he'd just be calling her names by now. And I suppose you do have to be open to the possibility of fraud. I mean, Steph was as tactfully as possible raising that issue. You'll find he actually repeats that over and over again. He apologises and said, "I'm not saying it's you," and things like that. But yeah, you've got to be open to the possibility of fraud, because people can fake things. Later on, I'm going to talk about Susan Blackmore and her experiences. She's a major figure within this field, and yeah, people can fake things on both sides of the argument, I should point out as well. See my skeptic video, what I said about Project Alpha. But Stefan says he's done some research into this. He hasn't done that much, actually. I found that out with the previous Afterlife video I did in reply to Stefan. So let us continue.
I know that there's been $1 million reward out for the past 30 years by the amazing Randi for anyone who can prove psychic phenomenon. You know, hundreds and hundreds of people have attempted to do so, and they've all failed. There have been no...
We know we're going to die, and there is a kind of nobility in facing up to a truth, even if it is bleak. And this is the only life we've got.
So, the Randi's Prize, yes. What's wrong? Steph repeats basically the flannel that is actually what used to be on the JREF website, which I've talked about many times before. If you just watch my skeptic videos, especially the one I did, Truth Seekers Northeast, that's it's a bit shorter and less detailed, but it's the most up to date and I think the best performance I've done of that particular talk. So Steph says, yes, but it's all been out there. It's legally watertight. This prize. You just turn up, do something involving Psi, and Randi will give you $1 million. Why? How come hundreds of people have applied and no one's got it? Well, if you want to know more details about that, it's actually not. It's not as straightforward as you might think. The George Simpson lawsuit, for example, which I discuss in my skeptic videos, was distinctly involved with the $1 million challenge. Randi himself now, of course, has gone. He's gone to that great skeptic conference in the sky, if that's not a contradiction in terms. I wonder what he thinks, actually. I really do. So check out my skeptic videos. I won't put a link in the description box. You can find them.
I think all this proves is that I think this proves that Randi has some way of thwarting people's psychic abilities. Every time he, even gets into the picture at all, people can't make it happen, or else his requirements for proof are unreasonable. I don't know which it is, but I know for certain that I've seen so much evidence of psychic development, psychic abilities, and changes in people's psychic levels based on their exercise, based on their research, based on their really working on it, and I've seen the changes occur. So if nobody can prove it to Randi, all that means is there's no way to prove it to Randi.
We know we're going to die, and there is a kind of nobility in facing up to a truth, even if it is bleak. And this is the only life we've got.
Now, the idea, proponents of Randi's Prize, the $1 million challenge, which is now closed, incidentally. I think it's no longer available anymore. I think the JREF is still running even post Randi's lifetime, but the $1 million challenge, I believe, is now shut down. This is actually from a few years ago, this recording. If you read through it's all archived, so you can read through the details. It all looks very legally watertight. Everything's agreed beforehand. Lawyers are present. You have to sign contracts. There are all kinds of rules. They've done a live one on stage once at a conference. It's really good. But it's not what it appears to be. We've got to realise about this that James Randi is a showman. That's his job. That's what he's been doing his whole life, appearing on stage, entertaining people with trickery, with sleights of hand and things like that. And there is, the lady being interviewed is not very specific. She says, well, obviously Randi has a way of not making it happen. I've witnessed too much. I've witnessed too much myself for me to come to any other conclusion. Now, that is a supposition on her part. However, she may not be aware that there are serious loopholes. There are serious holes in the Randi's JREF challenge. It has been criticised. There has been a lawsuit which the JREF did lose, and I discussed it more in my skeptic video. But if you want to know, if you want an unbiased opinion of the JRAV $1 Million Challenge, in fact, no one ever won it. So that means there's no one's ever won it. So that means there's no psi. That's completely false. Someone, as I said, there's been a lawsuit. Maybe there's been others I don't know about. It's all been covered up. There's been no talk about it, but it has happened. It's not what it appears to be.
Well, that's certainly one argument, and I don't know enough, and I don't know enough about his methodology. As far as I understand it, it's the same sort of card test, and all he's trying to do is find more than random guesses. So, but just from an outsider, again, not knowing you personally and not having had your level of experience within the field, there's a number of different explanations that are possible. One is that that you believe that something is occurring where it's not. And again, I'm not going to try and argue with that with you. I'm certainly not going to try and talk you out of 30 or 40 years of experience within the field. But there certainly has, to my knowledge, been no scientific proof of psychic phenomenon. Again, that may mean something, it may mean nothing, but just from the sort of skeptical element.
We know we're going to die, and there is a kind of nobility in facing up to a truth, even if it is bleak, and this is the only life we've got.
Well, this is the question. I mean, it's a valid question, I suppose. Is she seeing things just because she wants to see them? What about her confirmation bias? What about evidence for psi? I mean, Stefan said, to my knowledge, this has never ever been proven to have taken place. Many, many others have also said the same things. And indeed, we're going to be hearing some more detail about that later in this video, about whether evidence for psi actually has occurred. Psi PSI, it's not pounds per square inch, Stefan says later. It's short for parapsychology. It just covers all the sort of weird stuff, paranormal, basically. But as I'll explain later, and I have explained in other videos, there are political reasons, psychological as well, and cultural, for the mainstream not accepting the reality of psi. It's got nothing to do with science, as well as personal problems that the scientists themselves have, which I will also explain. So let's let him continue. Or her continue.
Are you including past life regression in that? Sure?
Yes.
Are you including past life regression?
That's my understanding, yes. Sorry, go ahead.
There is a gentleman who comes, excuse me, Seth, there is a gentleman who comes to hypnotherapy conventions regularly, who is a regular speaker. His name is David Quigley. He literally has never had any piano lessons. He couldn't play chopsticks before he had the past life regression that led him to remember a past life where he could play concert lever piano. And now he plays at these conventions. Everybody comes and listens to him. The man is amazing. He easily could make a career out of music, except he chooses to make a career in hypnotherapy. And this is something that would be absolutely impossible, except for the fact that he had the past life regression that resulted in this memory coming back.
Well, okay, that's certainly possible.
I know how he played before it.
Well, that's certainly possible, but there are other explanations, right? I mean, there are other explanations of this kind of phenomenon, right? He may have taken lessons, which he hasn't told anybody.
No, he didn't take. No, you don't get it. He didn't take lessons.
We know we're going to die, and there is a kind of nobility in facing up to a truth, even if it is bleak, and this is the only life we've got.
So, it's an explanation for past life regressions. That is what's known as hot reading. In other words, the knowledge that somebody has, which appears to come from a past life or through some other kind of psychic communication, actually comes through normal means. Such as, for example, he did have piano lessons, but he managed to hide it from all the people involved. This is the hot potato that Stefan and his guest are going to toss between each other. I should point out that I don't believe that this explanation can explain everything. I really don't think it can't. I've looked into this myself very, very considerably. Hot reading doesn't explain everything in past life regression. I've known people that are involved in this. Stefan is trying to be diplomatic here, I must say. He does treat this lady respectfully, I must say, Steph. I mean, to his credit, he doesn't mouth off her. He doesn't do the normal skeptic thing. He does bring up the possibilities you have to, and I would concede that somebody's making something up or they're faking stuff. You have to control for that. So let us continue.
You know the man. He couldn't play the piano. within a period of, an hour and a half from not being able to play the piano and not being able to play chopsticks, he went to concert level piano.
But how do you know, again, empirically and scientifically, a scientist would ask this, right? And I'm sure that there's ways of explaining it, but you don't know that he never had lessons, right? This is not empirically proven. This is just what he says, right? Self-reporting is notoriously unreliable.
It is empirically proven, because enough people know him. This is somebody I've known for many years. I know really well that he did not know how to play the piano.
We know we're going to die, and there is a kind of nobility in facing up to a truth, even if it is bleak, and this is the only life we've got.
So this kind of is an unfalsifiable hypothesis here. Stefan, and it's also kind of raising the bar. So there's really kind of two fallacies here. He's essentially saying that, well, how do you know? How do you know that he wasn't learning piano? Did he even if everyone who knows him says he never learnt to play the piano, and the only way he could have found out was through this through this communication from when he was Beethoven or something in a past life. Well, you see, if you, as Sherlock Holmes says, if you eliminate everything else, what's left, however improbable, has to be right. You don't make it impossible because it's weird. And simply saying, well, maybe he was learning the piano on some secret honky-tonk in his hidden family basement behind a cupboard, in a secret passageway. He muffled it with cotton wool so the family wouldn't hear him. I wish Liberace would do that, although he's been very quiet the last couple of months. I cut 2 minutes out here, by the way, because they just keep repeating the same point. Let me continue.
Child or learned or anything.
So what you're saying, again, this is just my particular perspective, right or wrong. What you're asking me to believe is based on hearsay that souls exist from life to life, that there is consciousness without matter, that there's such a thing as a soul, that there's the metaphysics that you talk about is valid. You're asking me to believe that based on the testimony of a few people that I've never met, that's not been subject to any rigorous scientific examination.
We know we're going to die, and there is a kind of nobility in facing up to a truth, even if it is bleak, and this is the only life we've got.
So, there's far more evidence than what Stefan knows about, obviously. I think this lady is aware of more evidence than Steph is. And this doesn't mean that will necessarily change his mind. Indeed, as you'll find out later in this video, he does go away and do some homework about this, and other people contact him on this matter with the skeptical explanation he accepts. But secondly, I do agree with him that there is a plausibility problem here. What is the mechanism of the soul and consciousness? Because it appears that the two are connected, because consciousness cannot be found in the workings of any of the material matter of the brain. So if it doesn't work via the neurons firing, things like that, how does it work? I covered this a little bit in my free will videos, but I don't believe that this if we dwell too much on this plausibility problem, we might miss the point. Because it doesn't mean that a current lack of understanding of that mechanism means we should reject the scientific evidence so far gathered. We have a lack of understanding on many things which we do accept as real. And indeed, in some cases, we utilize them. I mean, we don't know everything about electricity. There are mysteries associated with electricity. Doesn't stop me using it. Doesn't stop me lighting my room with it and running this computer off it. We just accept that we don't know everything about it, but we know enough to understand its basic properties and how it works. And I think consciousness and the soul is very similar in this field.
Sure. I asked you to go to the study center where they have done rigorous studies that are empirical, and they have studied at great length. Take yourself to the library, my friend, and look at the empirical research on this subject. There is absolutely stacks of it. You couldn't get through it in your lifetime.
So is this something that is accepted by the scientific community at large then? Has this been published in peer-reviewed scientific journals?
We know we're going to die, and there is a kind of nobility in facing up to a truth, even if it is bleak, and this is the only life we've got.
Has it been published in science? This is the question. No, it hasn't. Of course, they have not accepted it. I'll talk about this in more detail later. But is that because it's not real, or is it because there are political, cultural, and psychological forces that work in our society, polluting the pure scientific method. I think skeptics have this idea that, you know, science always draws these perfect circles wherever it goes, and it's kind of like impervious to anything that might get in the way. That's not true. And indeed, if just watch my other videos, like for example my review of the film The Discovery. That's a very interesting film indeed. They haven't accepted it. It's not published in scientific journals. It's not. It's in like we won't find it in things such as Nature and Science Magazine and the Scientific American and all these standard journals. You'll only find it in the specialized scientific press, which is like the journal of the SPR, things like that, Society of Psychical Research, and something similar to that, which are not really considered real science by the real scientists. So Steph's right. If Steph's trying to make a point, or because of this somehow it's not real, then he's wrong.
Actually, yes, some of it has.
We know we're going to die, and there is a kind of nobility in facing up to a truth, even if it is bleak. And this is the only life we've got.
So she says yes, it has. So I'm actually not aware of. I'm not aware of that myself. I struggled to find an example. I mean, maybe mentioned, I think the Focus magazine used to mention it, which is just like a popular science magazine. They mentioned sort of psychical research and things like that. They actually had an article by Susan Blackmore at one point, and they dillied with the alternative. They didn't have, pardon me, they didn't have people like Peter Fenwick and anyone really serious. I forgot who it was. It was years ago. I actually unsubbed to that magazine because it was so awful. It went downhill. So I don't actually know of an example that this lady says yes, it is. But you'll also find that when mainstream science supports something like this, it tends to be recategorized as something else. Fringe science, for the reasons I've explained above. Or there's also a bit of historical revisionism in science, and they have their sort of little copes. We've seen them do that with UFOs. And I'm sure we'll see them do it again.
Okay, well, look, that's very interesting stuff, and I will certainly have a look at that. I'm not a scientist, and of course, I don't know the people, and of course, I don't know you, right? So you're very aware that and I'm not putting you in this category, but just from my perspective, there are priests who will tell you that you are born, that Jesus was born of a virgin, and that you are inflicted with original sin, and the devils walk the earth, and so on, and they will tell you that
I don't believe any of that.
No, I understand that, right? But they're telling you that this is true. Now, as far as I'm concerned, again, no disrespect to you because I don't even know you, but somebody telling me that this stuff is true has about as much credibility to me as somebody telling you that Satan exists has for you.
We know we're going to die, and there is a kind of nobility in facing up to a truth, even if it is bleak. And this is the only life we've got.
That's actually an unfair comparison, I would say. It's not what she's claiming. I mean, she said, I mean, he didn't give her a chance really to explain why it's not the same at all. I don't know. I can't remember actually. She really does get into that in detail, but I cut a few minutes out actually because they just repeat these points for a few minutes without actually going into this in detail.
And it happens that the state that you don't like very much, and I don't like either.
So she's gone down a little bit. She's gone down in volume slightly. I hope you can still hear her.
The state actually has hired people in the military to do metaphysical things that have resulted in military action that took place on the metaphysical level. That goes on in the United States. It goes on in Russia. There is volumes of research on the subject, and if you're not aware of any of it, it just indicates you aren't aware of it.
We know we're going to die, and there is a kind of nobility in facing up to a truth, even if it is bleak. And this is the only life we've got.
She's absolutely right, and in fact, this comes up again later in another video. One of the other audios that I've got here. In fact, one of the audios I'm going to play is actually kind of like a breakdown in Steph's community of what was said here. We're talking about remote viewing, psychic assassins, weaponization, things like that. So I will go into that in a little while.
Okay, well let's do this.
You can't really inspect that particular item, but let me.
Well, if it's been declassified, you can inspect.
Well, I invite investigation in all areas.
We know we're going to die, and there is a kind of nobility in facing up to a truth, even if it is bleak. And this is the only life we've got.
Now, the third voice you heard in that little bit of clip, in that little clip I had there, is her husband. Now, he's a lot more sceptical. You don't hear him much in this particular audio, which is a shame, actually, because when husbands and wives have different views on this sort of thing, it's always very interesting. You heard her bite back a little bit there.
This is such an astonishing claim, right, that somebody has spontaneously learned how to play the piano with no possible way of ever knowing it beforehand. It's such an astonishing claim that I'm going to assume that there's a lot of evidence and research into this sort of topic.
We know we're going to die, and there is a kind of nobility in facing up to a truth, even if it is bleak. And this is the only life we've got.
An astonishing claim. An astonishing claim. Now, an astonishing claim is like the extraordinary claim thing, you know. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary explanations. I talk about that in my Skeptic video. Firstly, the whole thing, astonishing claim, it's a qualitative and subjective description that says absolutely nothing rational here. I mean, if someone says to me that's an astonishing claim, I always reply by, well, how many astonishing points does it score? And they won't be able to tell you, will they? But it's like that. I mean, I believe that if astonishing claims require astonishing evidence, well, how do you define astonishing evidence? Is there enough astonishing points in that evidence to match the points in the astonishing claim? So it doesn't really mean anything. It's essentially a piece of rhetoric. Watch my Skeptic video for the background.
If it does turn out that the evidence isn't there, then you have to give up the belief, right? I'm certainly willing to change my mind if the evidence is there. But if the evidence that you claim isn't there, then you have to give up the belief, right? Because otherwise it's just academic.
We know we're going to die, and there is a kind of nobility in facing up to a truth, even if it is bleak. And this is the only life we've got.
That's true. That's fair enough, actually. And I'll cover that again. This is going to come back. If the evidence points a different way, we have to change our position. That includes the null hypothesis. The null hypothesis must always be on the table. That is simply not true. And I'm open to that, see. Otherwise, our side becomes guilty of the unfalsifiable hypothesis fallacy. I must say, Steph does conduct himself far better in this particular series of interviews and audios than he did on the previous Afterlife interview. I can't remember all the details, but I do remember him being a little bit bitchy, and he's not in this one. He does give her a fair hearing. Anyway, that's the end of this particular audio, so we're going to go on to the next one. Okay, it's audio number 2 now, and this is Free Domain Radio, episode 634, and it's called Death Be Not Proud, and this is like a monologue by Stefan, so we'll hear what he has to say about this.
Good evening, everybody. Hope you're doing well. It's Steph, 5 o'clock on the 6th of February, 2007, and why not do the death sandwich? Why not have 2 death poems back-to-back? Mine in a poetry cage match with John Donne's Death Be Not Proud, which is, of course, just a little bit more famous. So let's have a look at his and see where the differences are, what I think is, what I think is so important, what I think is good and bad about it.
We know we're going to die, and there is a kind of nobility in facing up to a truth, even if it is bleak. And this is the only life we've got.
So, yeah, he's talking about a particular poem, which is a very interesting one, actually, and he's going to analyse it. And we'll just have a look into it. We'll have a look into it ourselves. And whoops, where is my notes? There they are. Yeah. Interesting. He says he's driving along. You can tell this is quite one of his old ones. This is, I think, from about 2006, 2007. He actually used to record that when he was driving to work before he started doing these particular. Before he started doing full-time ones where he's standing in front of a white screen in his cellar. It's called Sonnet 10. It's also known by its opening line, Death Be Not Proud. It's a 14-line poem, a sonnet, by the English poet John Donne, 1572 to 1631. He's contemporary of Shakespeare in that case. One of the leading figures in the metaphysical poets group of the 17th century English literature. Yeah. This is written between February and August 1609. First published posthumously in 1633, 2 years after he died. So it's amazing. It took all those months to write. He must have worked on it an awful lot. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll show you a picture of old John. There he is. There we go. This is the chap himself, John Donne, and I'll read you his poem. It's some of the language is a bit old-fashioned. If you've been with things like that. Death, be not proud, though some have called thee mighty and dreadful, for thou art not so. For those whom thou think'st thou dost overthrow, die not, poor death, nor yet canst thou kill me. From rest and sleep, which but thy pictures be, much pleasure, then from thee much more must flow. And soonest our best men with thee do go, rest of their bones and soul's delivery. Thou art slave to fate, chance, kings, and desperate men, and dost with poison, war, and sickness dwell, and poppy or charms can make us sleep as well. And better than thy stroke, why swell'st thou then? One short sleep past, we awake eternally, and death shall be no more. Death, thou shalt die. It's interesting. Let's hear what Steffi has to say about it.
There are certain issues that I have with the general flavor, and this, of course, is just based on the writer's religious approach and religious upbringing and religious sentiments. But, of course, the real challenge, or at least one of the real challenges, is that in personifying death, you really have created a basic contradiction in the poem, or in the approach, which is that death is the absence of life. And so to personify death, to start the poem with "Death, be not proud," makes no sense.
We know we're going to die, and there is a kind of nobility in facing up to a truth, even if it is bleak, and this is the only life we've got.
It does make sense. It makes perfect sense. It's actually a very common literary device to paste a subjective identity onto something inanimate. Stephen Hawking, he used to talk about the mind of God. Now, Stephen Hawking was an atheist, an atheo-skeptico-materialist. He didn't believe in God, yet he used the term mind of God. In a sense, again, it was a poetic phrase, really, to describe his view about the workings of the universe, about working out how the universe works. So, in a way, John Donne is not doing anything really different. He's pasting, he's using this same literary device. He's creating an identity, a fictional identity, and he's pasting it onto this concept, which is death. With death.
I mean, unless you're religious, right? If you're religious, then death really is associated with Satan. And it is a lack of religious faith that would make you fear death. And therefore, the fear of death would be satanic in its essence, or at least non-Christian in its essence. Because, of course, this is one of the basic paradoxes of Christianity that nobody has ever really seemed to be able to resolve, which is that if God is so great, what are you doing here? Why are you wallowing in the muck of the physical when you could be floating up like an exhale of dandelion spores to the mighty realm of God?
We know we're going to die, and there is a kind of nobility in facing up to a truth, even if it is bleak, and this is the only life we've got.
So Steph, he's a bit of a poet himself, is our Steph, I must say. He has written poems, I should point out. If the poem was intended literally, then yes, it would be a blasphemy, I suppose. But it's not, it's abstract. It's a very, very different kind of concept, which is really, at the time Donne lived and wrote this poem, it was a very, very different kind of world. A lot of these modern ideas of pluralism and, spiritual but not religious and things like that, they'd only just come on the scene. I mean, Shakespeare actually was one of the pioneers of these, and Donne is another. It's abstract.
Well, of course, you would only fear death based on a lack of faith. And so, death is it's a bumpy cab ride, but, and it's 5 minutes long, or 10 minutes long, or an hour long, whatever you want. It's a bumpy cab ride to the best party ever, where you'll never have to leave. So, for a Christian to cross over the threshold of death is to vault pogo stick-like into a magical land of wonder, joy, and helium balloons. So for a religious writer, death, or the fear of death, is associated with, at best, a lack of faith, and at worst, a negation or an anti-theistic approach to life.
We know we're going to die, and there is a kind of nobility in facing up to a truth, even if it is bleak, and this is the only life we've got.
I love his. I do love his. I do like the style, Steph's style of speaking. He's very witty. I mean, it's obviously he believes in a stereotype of the whole thing, but it's not like that at all. I mean, it's in Dunn's time, England and Europe were emerging. They were going through a revolution of the soul. They were emerging from the superstitious millennium, the Dark Ages and the Middle Ages, where people were like burned at the stake for having red hair or being left-handed and things like that. So people were allowed to speak openly in this particular period, 16th, 17th century, about things that they were never allowed really to talk about before. There was questions asked about the nature of being, the nature of the soul, and things like that. And it can be found in Shakespeare. William Shakespeare wrote some very interesting things, which indicates that he wasn't some kind of religious doctrinaire person. I know some people say it wasn't Shakespeare. I mean, it was, but I don't have time to go into that now. But it's an interesting idea actually, and it holds some validity. But I'm going to ignore that for the purposes of this video. For example, this is very, very famous line here from Hamlet, Act 8, Scene 1. To grunt and sweat under a weary life, but that the dread of something after death, the undiscovered country, from whose bourne no traveller returns, puzzles the will, and makes us rather bear those ills we have, than fly to others that we know not of. It's rather like people who have the C word, V word, isn't it? Yeah, that's now a deeply religious man wouldn't say that, because the purpose of this particular phrase, which the character Hamlet believes in, and there's a lot of Hamlet, the character, makes a lot of statements like this in the play, is that he's asking questions about, you know, what does happen after we die, and it's pretty clear he does have doubts about the classic stories of the Bible and heaven and hell and things like that, and it's at some point in the same play actually. He mentions about being shrived by a priest, in other words, given the last rites, distinctly Catholic thing, and there's mentions of purgatory and things like that. In Elizabethan England, that wasn't the mainstream view, yet it was allowed to be discussed. So the passage indicates a belief in the possibility of an afterlife, but still a fear of death, because no one knows what it might be like until you've died and gone there, in which case, once you go there, you can't come back. It's a one-way street, and no one knows what's around that corner to the rest of the street. Once you've gone around that corner, you are completely sealed off from the world you left before. Very different from the Judeo-Christian platitudes about the kingdom of heaven.
So when the poem starts out, "Death be not proud," what, in my view, Donne is really talking about is Satan, don't be proud. Right? Some have called the mighty and dreadful, says John Donne. And he says, you're not that way, because you think you overthrow, but I don't die, and you can't kill me.
We know we're going to die, and there is a kind of nobility in facing up to a truth, even if it is bleak, and this is the only life we've got.
Well, I think Steph is kind of making a contradictory point now, if I understand him correctly, because Donne's assertion is against Satan. It's not a negation of God. Although Donne doesn't actually mention Satan as a personification. He's not actually saying that Satan is a personification of death. He'd probably have to do that. If he lived 200 years earlier, he'd probably have to do that. and used more symbolism in what he was doing, like the great sculptors and painters of the time used to as well. They used to put in hints about things rather than saying them openly. So it's not a negation of God at all, nor is it something so blunt and frankly boring as simply saying, oh, when I say death I mean Satan. No.
And I mean, the problem with this is just not true. I mean, that's the basic problem that I have with this beautiful poem, a wonderfully written poem. I mean, there is no afterlife. Death does end us. We don't get to skirt past it like we're taking a side entrance out of a burning ship and go slither off to some happy eternal realm of perpetuity. We do die. Death, if you want to put it in that anthropomorphic kind of way, death wins.
We know we're going to die, and there is a kind of nobility in facing up to a truth, even if it is bleak, and this is the only life we've got.
So, really, this is the important point that Stefan Molyneux takes this. He makes this is a kind of a priori thing. It's a kind of foundational assumption on his part when he analyses this poem. But the fact of the matter is, what he's just said is not true. It's factually untrue, I believe, for reasons that I've discussed in my previous reply video on this subject to him. This doesn't mean, but it doesn't mean that the afterlife is some perfect place with pogo sticks and balloons, as he said. Again, that's a rather crass stereotype, I would say. I don't believe necessarily that there is a heaven or a hell. Certainly not permanently. My only assertion I ever make, and most people who are seriously into this subject make, is that when we die, it's not the end of us. Our consciousness continues in a form which is different to our current existence, but nevertheless is us as identity. We continue, we have memories, for example, that we share here, we have an identity and things like that. Apart from that, I don't actually go into any more details than that.
So death can only really be personified in a poetic sense if you're willing to accept that there's something beyond death, and also that death is a test of faith.
We know we're going to die, and there is a kind of nobility in facing up to a truth, even if it is bleak, and this is the only life we've got.
Well, that's weird, because that's untrue. Steph knows this is untrue, because he is an atheist who's written a poem about this. I'm not going to read out his poem. But many atheo-skeptico-materialists have written poems about death and dying. For example, Robert Louis Stevenson. This is Requiem by Robert Louis Stevenson, a famous Scottish author from the mid-19th century. Under the wide and starry sky, dig the grave and let me lie. Glad did I live, and gladly die, and I laid me down with a will. This be the verse you grave for me. Here he lies, where he longed to be. Home is the sailor home from the sea, and the hunter home from the hill. Nothing there about afterlife or anything like that, because Stevenson didn't believe in such things. There's there's actually a lot of examples of atheists who have written poems about about death, and indeed some of them are written out. Some of them are read out at humanist funerals as well. So if you go to a humanist funeral, you may well hear one of them actually recited by readers.
So to me, to counsel people as John Donne does to deal with their problems of dying by pretending that death doesn't work, so to speak, or it doesn't take, it's like it just doesn't quite take. That, I think, is a fundamental misdirection. A lie, frankly. It's a pious lie, which actually kind of makes it all the worse, because he's actually trying to, I guess, comfort people in a way. But, sort of, ha-ha, death, you mean nothing to me, ha-ha. I mean, that's just nonsense. That's not how you deal with the challenge of mortality, by pretending that it doesn't exist. It's not responsible, it's not rational, it's not helpful. It just kind of drugs people into fantasizing that they're going to come back to life. I'm back.
We know we're going to die, and there is a kind of nobility in facing up to a truth, even if it is bleak, and this is the only life we've got.
So, if Steph comes back, I wonder what it'll come back as. Probably some kind of zombie. Anyway, everything he said, is dependent on whether the afterlife is real or not. What he said, it actually, that doesn't take unless the idea of the afterlife is factually untrue. It's all dependent on that, and he's using this as a base assumption that it is true. And that's where he's wrong. Where am I? Okay.
I mean, I can't imagine a doctor saying, I'm sorry, Mr. Molyneux, you have terminal cancer, but don't worry, you'll come back to life. It's like, really? Am I going to come back to life? Can you not lock that silver thing in the basement so I can sort of get out without being cold or whatever? I mean,
we know we're going to die, and there is a kind of nobility in facing up to a truth, even if it is bleak, and this is the only life we've got.
That's a false metaphor that he makes there. It's the thing about the person with cancer and stuff like that. He's essentially saying, he'll come back to this point, actually, that our physical life in this world is reduced in value because of this. So, don't worry, you're going to come back to life, says the doctor. Well, no, that's nonsense. Anyway, it's interesting, there's a reference in that. I don't know if you picked it up. You may have done if you've watched the film. There's a reference in what he said to the film The Asphyx. If you remember my best horror film video, you'll know that I mentioned The Asphyx in there. So Steph has obviously seen it, so he obviously has a pretty good taste in movies.
Taking refuge in fantasies of coming back to life is incredibly destructive on so many levels. It doesn't give you the richness of tasting the deep but bitter fruit that is your own mortality. It doesn't give you the spur to ambition. It doesn't give you the spur to virtue. It just gives you I can put it to one side because it doesn't really exist.
We know we're going to die, and there is a kind of nobility in facing up to a truth, even if it is bleak, and this is the only life we've got.
Well, I don't know if you spotted them, but there are two atheo-skeptico-materialist falsehoods in what he just said. Firstly, there's an attempt at an MBA, Materialist Bravery Award. Stefan, if you're going to go for that, you're going to have to go through the proper channels. Don't try to do what Dawkins did. And secondly, Steph does something that lots of skeptics and atheo-materialists do. He tries to assert that belief in an afterlife reduces the preciousness and importance of our current existence. Dawkins does this all the time. Now, I've read Dawkins' book, I've listened to him talk, I've listened to other people say something similar, and I've never ever understood why that is the case. Why does belief in an afterlife reduce the value of our current existence? In the clip the clip that I take from, which is the little notification jingle, he actually says, this is the only life we've got. Let's make the most of it. Things like that. He mentions this a couple of times. It's actually it's a clip from a program called Secular Believers that you can find on YouTube. I don't know why that is, and I can think of numerous reasons why the opposite might be true. It could be that belief in an afterlife increases the value of our current life. It depends on the individual. It's all very subjective. I personally can't understand the other way around. Let's let him carry on anyway.
And if I've got an eternity, then this life, in the face of eternity, is, 1 millimeter to the right of non-existence. Next to eternity, even a life of 100,000 or 1,000,000 years would be an irreducibly small instant.
We know we're going to die, and there is a kind of nobility in facing up to a truth, even if it is bleak, and this is the only life we've got.
Oh, right. This is actually a very old cliche. It's not very original. It's all It's supposedly applying a mathematical formula to this. If we live forever, then our current life's value, whatever there is, if we, for example, if you have infinite incarnations, which appears to be the case from what I can gather, whatever the value we put on our current life we have to multiply it by infinity. And do you know what happens if you multiply any number by infinity? What do you get? 0. So the value we place on our life, you multiply it by infinity because we have an infinite numbers of lives or infinite number of existences, and we get 0. I don't think that follows. I don't think it does. I don't think you can reduce this to a mathematical formula. For all we know, what we're going through right now, what I'm going through right now, might be a vital step in my evolution. It could be that I'm like Tom Hanks's character in Cloud Atlas. If you remember, he goes from in the first incarnation, he's this evil doctor who does evil things. Then he plays a minor character, a hotel clerk. Then in the third one, he's this mild-mannered scientist who stands up to these oil barons. I mean, it could be that I did something really horrible in a past life, and what I'm doing now in my current life is trying to make amends for that karmically, which would mean that my current existence is extremely important indeed. I don't know. I don't have those memories. A reason why, incidentally, I think that we don't have past life memories is because for the reasons I think in Cloud Atlas. I mean, if Tom Hanks's character really remembered everything that he'd done in a past life, how would he be able to do his job as a nuclear scientist in 1973, knowing that a century before he was a doctor on board a ship trying to poison some guy to steal his money? I think you go through the river Styx and have all these things taken away from you simply so you can exist in your current life effectively. I know some people do have past life memories, and I'm sure maybe I could recover some if I got it with the right process, but yeah, I'm not sure I want to.
And I think that it's possible that people do have this belief, right? As the oxygen-starved brain upon death does produce visual hallucinations that I'm sure comfort people, and we can see, of course, why this might occur, that people are going to feel good when they die, lots of endorphins, lots of, going to join the relatives and hike up to the cast of Shogun, and that occurs because when people are dying, you don't want their cries to draw predators and all this kind of stuff, right? It's possible that there is that, sigh and die kind of thing.
We know we're going to die, and there is a kind of nobility in facing up to a truth, even if it is bleak, and this is the only life we've got.
That's actually a very interesting idea that never really occurred to me before. Stefan has just put out a theory that there might be an evolutionary advantage for physically caused near-death experiences. I've never thought about that before. If that's the case, if that's possible, if that's the case, then I don't think it explains away the NDEs, but it's just a funny idea, yeah. But I have said in other videos, and I've explained, the evidence indicates that near-death experiences do not have a physical cause. I mean, there's a lot of research going into this now with BICS. This is the Bigelow Investigation into Consciousness Studies, or Bigelow Institute for Consciousness Studies. Oh, Bob Bigelow, he's moved on from UFOs. He's now into psychical research, yeah. But I was actually just watching an interview with him before I started recording, and it's very interesting what he's come up with. He's really funding this very, 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 very carefully. So, again, if it's not factually true, if the factual cause is not the endorphins and things like that in your brain to stop you crying in pain and attracting the hungry wolf, you see, it's all dependent on Stefan's foundational principle, and his foundational principle is wrong.
But there's no reason to believe that there is, and there's every reason to believe that there's not. I mean, the dead far outnumber the living hundreds to one, and you'd think that if they were all over the place, there would be some minor evidence of them, or at least some energy would be perceived as leaving the body on death, and this kind of stuff. I mean, there's no evidence whatsoever for any kind of afterlife.
We know we're going to die, and there is a kind of nobility in facing up to a truth, even if it is bleak, and this is the only life we've got.
Well, he's wrong on both counts. I'll go into details later in this video, but also I've also discovered other things which I include in other videos which are similar to this one. So I can't put all the links in. There's too many of them, but just have a search through my channel.
the more they're going to dislike what they actually have. So it's more, I believe anyway, it's more of a hatred of the existing life that drives people to this kind of nonsense than it is anything to do with a love of the afterlife. It's not that you break up with your girlfriend because you think there's a better girlfriend just around the corner. You just can't stand your girlfriend that much right now, and haven't for some time. So
We know we're going to die, and there is a kind of nobility in facing up to a truth, even if it is bleak. And this is the only life we've got.
That is utterly preposterous. It really is. How can he know that? He's essentially putting himself in other people's shoes, and inserting his own assumptions into their personalities. How can he possibly know that belief in the afterlife comes about through hatred of our current life? Is there scientific evidence from psychologists? What about me? I believe in life after death. Do I hate my own life? No. I think this is probably going on to. He's probably been reading too much Ayn Rand. I mean, he's now said that he's a critic of Ayn Rand as well as an admirer. But that's the kind of thing she would say in one of her books. As brilliant as those books are in some way, she's completely off base on so many things. It looks like Stefan is too. Anyway, that's the end of another one of these audios. There's still 2 more to go, so don't go away. Okay, now we come on to Free Domain Radio program 650. Now, this is actually the most interesting of these 4 audios that I have for you this evening. It's a call-in show, but it includes a segment within it, which is, I can't remember where it was. It's near the end. It's almost at the end, so I can't remember the exact timestamp for it. There's a link in the description box to that, as always, and you just go till you're about half an hour from the end, I think. And it's actually, someone comes on who's been posting on Stefan's forum. I mean, he doesn't have it anymore. Do you remember the good old forums? Ah, yes, nostalgia, in the pre-Facebook Twitter age. And it's actually replied to someone. It's actually a reply by somebody to the lady who's in program 643, the past life regressionist with who knows the guy who can play the piano. And what he has to say is very interesting, and there's a lot of tangents that come off it, which I'm going to explore. So let us begin.
He said, Steph, I listened to your latest podcast, 643, believe it or not, last night. You mentioned to the woman who favorably referenced the literature of the Theosophical Society that you would do some research into peer-reviewed scientific literature in the subject. I also noticed that her husband agreed with your skin in the game comment, but she did not chime in with agreement, nor would I expect a person like that to do so. I used to believe strongly in PSI, and related subjects, but have essentially dropped such beliefs in favor of extreme skepticism as of about 20 years ago. I would be happy to immediately reverse myself if I were to learn of a well-controlled, peer-reviewed scientific study that provided experimental results to high statistical confidence in any aspect of PSI. Is that, what does that mean? Pounds per square inch?
We know we're going to die, and there is a kind of nobility in facing up to a truth, even if it is bleak. And this is the only life we've got.
Yeah, I talked about this earlier. Psi is simply short for parapsychology, and that's defined. I'll read you the actual Wikipedia definition. It's the study of alleged psychic phenomena, extrasensory perception, telepathy, precognition, clairvoyance, psychokinesis, that's moving things with your mind, telekinesis, the ability to move things at a distance, and psychometry, which is learning, it's kind of ESP involving inanimate objects, and other paranormal claims. For example, those related to near-death experiences, synchronicity, apparitional experiences, etc. It is considered to be a pseudoscience, and a vast majority of mainstream scientists reject it. So that's basically what it is. It's funny, Steph didn't know that, because he has... I'm not going to get ad hominem with him. He's actually been very good in this particular series of audios compared to many other skeptics. But, that's something that's something he should have known.
Because I believe in that. A psychic phenomenon, right? I think the psychic phenomenon. I have not seen any such in over 20 years. Many claims, of course, but no science I could value. In regard to your
he's still reading from this person's post on the forum, I should point.
Research, I highly recommend what I believe is the best summary on psychic and related research by Susan Blackmore, whose website is www.susanblackmore.co.uk.
We know we're going to die, and there is a kind of nobility in facing up to a truth, even if it is bleak, and this is the only life we've got.
Yeah, this Susan Blackmore is a name that comes up again and again. I've already mentioned it before. She is a kind of, to use her own term, rent-a-skeptic. She was on TV all the time. Whenever you were on the TV and you wanted some kind of... I'm getting some strange background noise. What's that? Is this still working? Okay. And you wanted, if you were doing a TV show about UFOs or ghosts or Loch Ness Monster, and you needed somebody to come on to present the skeptic side across, Susan Blackmore was always the person you bring in. Her background's very interesting. Her website, I'll tell you more details about her website in a minute. But she was this rent-a-skeptic person long before Frenchie. Yeah, Chris French kind of took over from her, I would say. I'm going to repeat some of the things I've said in my skeptic video, but I'm going to go into more details now. Interestingly, though, she doesn't see, she seems, a lot of the woo-woos hate her, but she seems to be quite a nice person. I met her once, actually. And she's friends with Dr. Peter Fenwick. He regularly goes to see her. Peter Fenwick, of course, is the woo of all woos when it comes to the afterlife. But he spends a lot of time with her. Obviously, like having a debate. So yeah, that's just but I mean, I'll tell you a little bit more about Susan Blackmore and her experiences, and her life journey, which is extremely interesting because she's gone from one extreme to the other. But anyway, let's carry on with this.
It was originally from a Skeptical Inquirer article from the spring of 1987, Skeptical Inquirer, but now is fortunately available on her website at susanblackmore.co.uk/articles/si87.html, entitled The Elusive Open Mind, 10 Years of Negative Research in Parapsychology.
We know we're going to die, and there is a kind of nobility in facing up to a truth, even if it is bleak, and this is the only life we've got.
Now, I've actually managed to locate that article. It has a different URL. I'll give you the new URL. It's actually, the article he's talking about is still available. I will be referring to it in a little while and going into more details about it. It's actually, its current URL is https://www.susanblackmore.uk/articles/the-elusive-open-mind-negative-research-in-parapsychology/. Now, I've never read this before, and I'm going to be reading. I have read it since, actually. Well, I will. Well, I haven't read all of it. I've skimmed read it. I'm going to read it properly in a minute. But I have heard Susan Blackmore speak many times. I've heard her speak. I've watched her conference recordings, and I've also been to a conference when she was in London, at TAM London. I think in 2012 this was. I mean, I did an article about it on the main Her Panmo site years ago. But I did meet her and speak to her. She gave me a funny look as if she recognised me, which is odd. And so that's the article that this person said changed his mind. So that's quite something, isn't it?
I read it some months ago, and it was still as powerful an article for me as when I first read it 20 years ago. If memory serves me, according to Blackmore, somewhere around the time of the publication of this article, she stated that the only experiments that may have indicated a scientific basis for psychic phenomenon, past or then present, were those of Charles Honorton of Princeton, and they were very weak and could possibly be reduced to statistical irrelevance with more well-controlled follow-on experimentation. Susan Blackmore, who initially strongly believed in psi, summarized the whole psi and related claims in a way that I thought was about as objective as a person could be, and more importantly, from a perspective of a very serious researcher in the psi and related fields for over 10 years. She eventually lost interest in the subject due, in large part, to the lack of scientific justification.
We know we're going to die, and there is a kind of nobility in facing up to a truth, even if it is bleak, and this is the only life we've got.
So, that's very interesting. This is an article which had a huge effect on this person, the person who commented on Steph's forum. And he actually does appear, he actually comes on to the show and actually speaks. But there's the thing is, when I should go into a little bit of a background of Susan Blackmore. She was originally an extremely open-minded and wildly idealistic young student here in Oxford. And in 1970, she was doing a course in, I think, biology of some kind, and she was making good progress with that. But then she began her career as a true believer. She says she began her career as a true believer in the paranormal. And this was due in part to a very intense drug trip that she experienced at a house in 1970 while she was a student here in Oxford. Students do this sort of thing. But it triggered her interest enormously. Now, after years and years of painstaking research, and I'll be reading through this article in a minute, but so she can just tell us in her own words. But I've heard her already say she found no evidence at all for paranormal phenomena, and concluded eventually that it simply does not exist. She's been chasing an illusion. She's been barking up a tree where there's nothing there. And there's a speech she gave at TAM London, and it wasn't filmed, but I was in the audience. And it was one of the most interesting speeches I've ever heard a skeptic give. Because she reveals an event in her life that she has mentioned it in other talks which have been recorded. And indeed it's been documented in the Journal of the Society for Psychical Research and many other things. And it's mentioned on her website, but she only brought it up once on stage and in detail, and it was this instant where I was there. It was actually TAM London 2010. This is to do with a project she did in 1979 with Dr. Carl Sargent. She assisted him with his experiments to find out if the Ganzfeld method could produce proof of psi. Supernatural mental abilities. Now, the Ganzfeld method is where you put one person in one room and a second person is separated completely in another room. They can't talk to each other by normal means, but one tries to communicate with the other telepathically. Now, if you ever seen these people sitting in chairs with golf balls over their eyes, that's the Ganzfeld test. Now, what happened was Sargent appeared to have produced some highly significant scientific results, which absolutely captivated Susan Blackmore. She couldn't believe it. She said, "This is it." So she got on the phone to him and says, Dr. Sargent, will you let me come up to Cambridge? Will you let me come up to your laboratory? Can I supervise you in your laboratory? Please, let me supervise you." And he said, "Okay." So she basically sped up to the other place, as we call it in Oxford, as fast as she could. And it seemed that Sargent had discovered everything she dreamed of. It was finally here. She dedicated 10 years of her life to looking into this sort of thing, and now it was here. It's the dream had come true, or was about to come true, but she quickly became very suspicious that Dr. Carl Sargent was cheating. And the actual document, the article, which was actually published in the Journal of Society for Psychical Research, and it is reproduced on her personal website. Her writing style is very professional. It's very cool-headed. She even thanks Dr. Sargent for the opportunity to supervise him. But what is absent is the emotionally painful nature of this incident. She's only ever divulged the true extent to which it traumatized her in this particular lecture at TAM London 2010, which was not filmed, but I was there in the audience. And she starts weeping on stage. I've never seen her do this before. She actually starts crying and has to stop and blow her nose and wipe her eyes. When she published this article, she was very severely reprimanded by her own psychical research supervisor for accusing Sargent of cheating. He just had a go at her, basically. He said, "You can't, how dare you accuse this respectable Dr. Carl Sargent of cheating?" Now, as she saw it, all she was doing was being intellectually honest. She was doing her job, supervising another scientist. And her conclusion was that he was committing scientific fraud, and she decided to expose that. Was she supposed to keep quiet about that? Apparently. But why should she be made out to be the bad guy? Dr. Carl Sargent was never officially charged for his alleged misdemeanor. He continued in his scientific career unchallenged, and today he's left science altogether. He designs role-playing fantasy games at the moment. Now, I hope you'll bear with me. There's nothing that I despise more than an amateur psychologist, except perhaps a professional one. But will you excuse me while I indulge myself in a bit of what I loathe and speculate that Susan Blackmore might have an axe to grind? If she does, it's probably a just one. But it may well have beat the trail to her discovery of the skeptic movement. Because some might find it strange that an individual with her kind of passionate certainty, which she used to have in the 70s, could possibly change her mind and become a skeptic. But it's actually no surprise to me at all. I've noticed this actually, that the people most likely to defect to skepticism from our community are the most zealous true believers, the most doctrinaire, the most chauvinistic towards opposing viewpoints. Because what I found is that the people like that, they either eventually change into skeppers or they just drop off the scene altogether. Those who see things more holistically, more introspectively, people who feel more sympathy and have more tolerance for skeptics and are willing to listen to their counter-arguments, they tend to be far more secure and stable in their ideas. And I think that's because it's something that's you often find in politics. The fanatic is more likely to feel offence and betrayal when reality does not match their narrow and conditional expectations. I suspect that Susan Blackmore was targeted by a witch hunt for basically doing her job, and this sort of thing, this kind of bitterness lingers. When you experience an injustice against yourself in your life, it's a bitterness that lingers. And you know what? I've had it too. I still sometimes find myself grinding my teeth over things that happened when I was a little kid. Especially if you are the kind of person who can't just brush these sort of things off. So that could be why she did go within a few years from being. She says, "I was lying in the bath one day. I just thought, well, maybe not. This is not all true. This is all not true." This was shortly after her experience with Sargent. It could be simply that it may not have been the full story. I'm not saying she's lying about her null hypothesis, but it could have influenced her.
And now has moved on to the study of memes and consciousness. So
yeah, that's what she's doing now. She's actually into consciousness study. She's still a skepper. But memes and things, she mentions memes sometimes.
I did have a brief look at this, and I will read.
Incidentally, she's married to Adam Hart Davis. You know, what did the Romans do for us? She's married to that guy.
Some of this sort of stuff. So, The Elusive Open Mind, 10 Years of Negative Research in Parapsychology. Everyone thinks they're open-minded, says old Susan. Scientists in particular like to think they have open mind to themselves. We shouldn't perhaps bear in mind. We need a psychic test for any sort of predictive or any sort of out-of-random guesses at things.
We know we're going to die, and there is a kind of nobility in facing up to a truth, even if it is bleak. And this is the only life we've got.
Okay, I skipped a little bit there. I wasn't originally intending to skip, because what Steph does, he sort of skim reads and picks out certain lines from an article. I'm now going to read that entire article in its entirety. Now, this could be a exclusive classic moment, you know, because this is the article that turned Stefan's correspondent on the forum into a skeptic. He used to be a proponent of psi. He used to believe in psi, but he read this article and he became a skeptic. So, am I going to become a skeptic now? This is what you ask. Are you about to witness the transformation of Ben Emlyn Jones from a true believer, a woo-woo, into a skeptic? Do you know what? I have to leave these possibilities open. I have to. I can't shut the door to anything at all. I can't completely eliminate the possibility that some piece of information maybe one day will come my way, or I might come to some kind of intuitive realization, like Blackmore did, that what I'm talking about on Hapanwo is not true. It could happen. If I don't leave that possibility open, then I'm as bad as the Ramonas who say, I don't care about the facts, I don't care about what's true, I don't care about what's fair. We want to reverse the referendum and stay in the EU. I'm no better than those people. These people include my dad, sadly. So I'm now going to read this article. And so drum roll. Am I about to turn into a skeptic like the guy Stefan was reading out? The Elusive Mind, 10 Years of Negative Research into Parapsychology, published in the Skeptical Inquirer, November 1987. Reprinted in The 100th Monkey and Other Paradigms of the Paranormal by Ed K. Frazier. And the Beacon Journal as well, and in a Danish newspaper translated. What does a psychologist who's had an extraordinary experience do? The answer is sets up a research program to test for psi. The lessons are surprising. Everyone thinks they are open-minded. I can't do a Susan Blackmore voice. All right, I don't know. I can't do her. I can't do her voice. Scientists in particular like to think they have open minds, but we know from psychology that it's just one of those attributes that people like to apply to themselves. We shouldn't perhaps have to worry about it at all, except the parapsychology forces one to ask, do I believe in this? Do I disbelieve in this? Or do I have an open mind? The research I have done during the past 10 or 12 years serves as well as any other research to show up some sort of some of parapsychology's peculiar problems and even perhaps some possible solutions. I became hooked on the subject when I first went up to Oxford to read physiology and psychology. I've been running the Oxford University Society for Psychical Research, the OUSP. Oh wow! I wonder if that's still running. Because if it is, I'd like to go along to their meetings. Finding witches, druids, psychics, clairvoyants, and even a few live psychical researchers to come and talk to us. We had Ouija board sessions, went exploring graveyards. Oh, I wonder if they went up to the church at Binsey. I bet they did. We did some experiments on ESP and psychokinesis, PK. Within a few weeks, I had not only learned a lot about the occult and the paranormal, but I had an experience that was to have a lasting effect on me. An out-of-body experience, OBE. It happened while I was wide awake, sitting, talking to friends. It lasted about 3 hours and included everything from a typical astral projection, complete with a silver cord and duplicate body, to free-floating flying, and finally to a mystical experience. It was clear to me that the doctrine of astral projection, with its astral bodies floating about on astral planes, was intellectually unsatisfactory. But to dismiss the experience as just imagination would be impossible without being dishonest about how it had felt at the time. It had felt quite real. Everything looked clear and vivid. I was able to think and speak quite clearly. I should point out right now, this is me talking now, that the kind of experiments that she talks about here have been done by the Robert Monroe Institute and indeed by other people. There's actually a book, people like Charles Lindbergh, he had an out-of-body experience on his famous transatlantic aeroplane flight in 1927, the first ever solo non-stop transatlantic flight, which include the silver cord and everything that connects you and stuff like that. Robert Monroe has written about this. It's very, very interesting indeed. And unlike Blackmore, these guys came up with positive results, or believed they interpreted the data as positive. I'll go back to Susan now speaking. You can imagine the intellectual conflict I experienced. And of course, I had no idea it was only a prelude to far worse mental conflicts. The psychologists and physiologists who were teaching me made quite different assumptions about human nature from those made by the people I met through the OUSPR. I'm not surprised. one's the university and the other's sounds like some kind of self-organized group within the university. The latter, for the most part, assume there is another dimension to man, that we can communicate directly mind to mind, and there are other worlds waiting to be explored in altered states of consciousness, and even the consciousness is separate from its physical home and might survive the death of the body. That's kind of what if you ever read Robert Monroe's Journeys Out of the Body, he talks about other worlds, he talks about other dimensions, And as I said, he interprets, he has a very, very different conclusion to Susan Blackmore. She continues, "The conflict was a challenge to me, and I conceived the objective, I think naively rather than purely arrogantly, of proving my teachers wrong, or at least showing that psychologists were closed-minded in ignoring the most important of human potentials, the paranormal. Even at that very early stage, I made a crucial mistake, or a series of crucial and related mistakes. First, I assumed that all these odd and inexplicable things, ESP, PK, OBEs, mystical experiences, ghosts, poltergeists, NDEs, were related, and that one explanation would do for all of them. Second, I assumed that there had to be a paranormal explanation, that we were looking for Psi. Psi had to be there, in other words. Third, and I don't know whether this was just cowardice or an attempt at being sensible for a change, rather than launching straight into what really interested me, the OBE, I thought it was more scientific to begin with Psi. After all, there had been research done on ESP and PK, and though generally rejected, it had some basis in scientific research. Yeah, as she says, mentions in other places this. She went into Psi because this is the most promising area of science. She believed it seemed far easier and safer to start there. I didn't notice what I was doing. I can only point it out with the benefit of hindsight. I just took Psi to be the key to the mysteries and wanted to study parapsychology. The first thing I did was develop my own theory of Psi. This theory involved the notion that Psi and memory are aspects of the same process. That memory is a specific instance of the notion of Psi and memory are aspects of the same process. That's the theory she developed. The memory is a specific instance of the more general process of ESP. Eventually, I got a place at Surrey University to do a PhD, and it was then that I set about testing my theory. While I was in Surrey, I was lucky enough to be given the chance to teach a parapsychology class. It attracted more than 100 students, so I had plenty of subjects for my experiments. God. Normally when people use the subjects for experiments, it's a little bit more sinister than that, isn't it? I began 3 kinds of tests. First, I predicted a positive correlation between ESP and memory. That is, if memory and ESP are aspects of the same process, then the same people should be good at both of them. Yeah, I suppose if that's her theory, I mean, yeah. I did many tests of this kind, Blackmore 1980A. Second, I predicted that the best target materials for ESP should not be those that were easy to perceive, but those that are easy to remember. I did a series of experiments with different target materials, Blackmore 1981A. Third, I predicted that the errors and confusion made in ESP should more closely resemble those made in memory than those made in perception. I had high hopes for this method, since the study of errors has always been so useful in psychology. For example, the study of visual illusions. I also did many experiments to test this, Blackmore 1981B. However, the only noteworthy thing about all the results was that the numbers that were not significant. After a long series of experiments, I had no replicable findings and only a large collection of negative results. Clearly, they could not answer my original questions, nor test my special theory. Some of you may already be protesting, "What an idiot! Why didn't she just give up and do something useful instead?" But I would have responded, this could be useful. If ESP exists, it could be one of the most important findings for science. And in any case, you can never tell in advance what research will be useful in the end. You may also be thinking, as many people said at the time, "Oh, but this is just what you'd expect. She's only shown that there is no Psi." But of course, I hadn't done that, and I couldn't do that. No amount of negative results can prove the non-existence of Psi. Psi might always be right around the next corner, and there are plenty of dark corners to look around. That's true. That's the negative assertion. You know, it's the burden of proof, which I talked about before, which she correctly defines. There are also plenty of parapsychologists eager to suggest corners I had not yet turned, and reasons why my experiments had not worked, and I was eager to carry on the search. Some said it might be the subject's students, that the subject students are notoriously not the best ones. So instead of testing my class, I tested people who came to me with claims of special powers. I tried to design experiments that would test what they claimed to be able to do, and that would allow me to impose sufficient controls. In some ways, this upset me more than anything, because I met lots of genuine and well-meaning people who were convinced they could communicate by telepathy, or find underground pipes or hidden water, until they tried to do it under conditions that ruled out normal sensory information. Then they and I were always disappointed. Then I tried using young children as subjects. At that time, Ernesto Spinelli was getting outstandingly good results with preschool children in ESP, Spinelli 1983. So I set about designing experiments to use a similar to his, although not a direct replication, to test my memory theory. It was much harder work than the previous experiment, but much more fun. The children were 3 to 5-year-olds in playgroups, and they thoroughly entered into the whole idea, being convinced they could transmit pictures to one another. But the results were quite clear. The proportion that were non-significant was as high as before. Susan actually says on one of her talks that she believed that children, hadn't been. She was still very, very idealistic and believed, well, children hadn't been polluted by conventions, so they're likely to have more psychic powers than adults. I actually think that's true. But anyway, I'll let her carry on. The overall results were non-significant, and so were the correlations with age. Blackmore 1980b. Why? Spinelli had many suggestions. It could be that I had used coloured pictures, while his were black and white. Or that the sweets I used as a reward, based on someone else's previously successful experiments, were too well liked by the children and were disruptive. You can do that sort of thing with animal training and animal psychology experiments, but giving sort of rewards in that sense, and the what's the word? Not the Pareto principle. It's where it's just a simple reward kind of thing, or negative incentive, things like that. It'll come to me in a minute. Based on someone else's previously successful experiments. If you do that with people and humans, it doesn't work. Pavlovian response, yeah. Even though humans are also governed by the Pavlovian response, it can mess things up badly. And doing that with children for sweets, yeah. She carries on. Or that I simply didn't have the right personality and rapport with the children. I could only say what I seemed to get on well with the children, but perhaps this was not well enough. Another suggestion was that the problem was not the subjects themselves, but the state of mind they were in during the experiments. Oh, here we go. She brings it up now. At the time, the Ganzfeld experiments were the latest thing, quote unquote. And the results from Dr. Carl Sargent at Cambridge and Chuck Oniton at Princeton seemed impressive. So I set about doing my Ganzfeld study. My subjects each had half a ping pony ball, I think that's ping pong, it's a misprint, covering each eye, and lay down on a reclining chair. And heard only white noise fed through headphones. I wrote down everything they said. Then they had to look at 4 pictures and choose which one they thought the agent had been looking at. I'm getting weird noises again. Is everything all right? I don't know if you can hear them. Is that EVP? Am I getting EVP? Oh, my God. I had for some months led an imaginary training group in which we practiced relaxation-guided imagery and many imaginary tasks adapted from Buddhist training techniques. For my Ganzfeld study, I chose 10 subjects from this group and 10 control subjects. This taught me a lot. Being in Ganzfeld is in itself an interesting experience. Images come pouring in, and it's tempting to imagine that you are picking them up from somewhere outside yourself. I also had one very impressive experience in which I was in which I was the subject and my brother was the agent. I saw people fishing, lakes, mountains, and Swiss chalets. And then when I saw the targets, I picked the correct one right away. it was an amazingly close hit. Yeah, I must point out that I actually did a similar thing with Tony Topping. It wasn't a Ganzfeld controlled experiment. It was part of his remote viewing course. And the first time I did it was at Hull, and I got I did actually get pretty good results on his remote viewing test. I actually got the same good results when I did it the test a second time, but then I was disappointed to find that this is not a criticism of Tony. He only has limited time. He simply repeated the same targets from the one in Hull, from the RawCon. So I think I mentioned that in my reportages. So probably, even though I didn't remember it consciously, subconsciously, I might have actually remembered what Tony put out as the target picture in RawCon. Okay, so here he goes again. It was an amazingly close hit. Yeah, it was an amazingly close hit. It set me wondering whether I had at last found the key. However, in the course of the experiment, I saw many equally amazing correspondences, but to the wrong pictures. My remarkable hit rapidly disappeared among the chance scores. This should have taught me something important, something I should have known all along. That is, one should not rely on subjective estimation of probability. See Blackmore and Trosyanko, 1985. One should rely on the statistics, and they were telling me that there was nothing there. Of course, I tried it again with my brother, but the second time it didn't work. Overall, the results were close to chance expectation. Why did this study also fail? I'd used trained subjects in psi-conductive conditions, and a method others had found successful. The ultimate suggestion of most parapsychologists was that it was an experimenter effect. More than that, it was a psi-mediated experimenter effect. That is, either I was using my own negative psi, or I had some kind of personality defect, or defect in belief had suppressed the psi of other people. And that's kind of what that lady in the first audio was accusing James Randi of. I don't know if that's true. There's other reasons to be very suspicious of Randy's prize, but I'll go to more details about that in other videos. I was a psi in... Excuse me. Pardon me. Oh, my goodness me. I was a psi inhibitory. A psi inhibitory. I've never heard that term before. A psi inhibitory experimenter. So that whatever I did, I would always get negative results. I don't know if that's true, actually. I mean, it may be. I mean, I think obviously this will be interpreted as just a cop-out. Skeptics will say, oh, you're just saying that because when a scientist gets negative results, you could just write it off as them being psi-inhibitory. And I understand that. It does seem to be another unfalsifiable hypothesis and on our part. But I do wonder if that's not a reason necessarily that it's untrue. Anyway, because I wouldn't have called her psi-inhibitory on the surface, because on the surface, as I said, since her 1970s drug trip, she was very idealistic and very positive. So, Susan, I don't think, maybe it's subconscious she was a psi-inhibitory person. I don't know. Because she was very, very, very keen to get the proper results. Oh, pardon me. Sorry, I'm not going to edit these things out. So that whatever I did, I would always get negative results. Psi-inhibitory. I began to get the feeling that I had some creeping sickness. I was a failure, a reject. There was something in me that suppressed the true spiritual nature of other people. I tried not to let it upset me, but I must admit that there is something terribly unflattering about being labelled psi-inhibitory. I do wonder, actually, if this might have come from the very negative experience she had, which reduced her to tears more than 30 years later. That may well have affected her attitude to these experiments. Through no fault of her own. I mean, she was upset by what had been done to her. It wasn't a fault on her part. She continues, well, what could I do about it? It's not entirely an untestable idea, but Sargent had already tested the personalities of successful and unsuccessful experimenters and found the successful ones to be extroverted, confident, and non-neurotic, and so on. In fact, I fitted the description quite well, except for my results. Yeah, she does come across like she's talkative, she's an extrovert, I'd say, from listening to her videos and her lectures and her interviews. And confident, yeah, she is non-neurotic. We've seen, I don't know about non-neurotic, it's possible she did suffer from neuroses caused by things in her own life that we don't know about, and certainly by her mistreatment as a result of the Carl Sargent study. Anyway, she carries on. The other keys to my failure seem to be belief. I was told that I didn't get results because I didn't believe strongly enough in psi, because I didn't have an open mind. That's kind of like the psi inhibitory thing, isn't it, on a more sort of rational level, or sorry, physical level. But what could I do about that? I couldn't just change my beliefs overnight or test 10 subjects while believing and 10 others while not. I argued that I should point out actually that the belief effect is important. And I mean, you see, if she'd done that, she would have been criticised the other way around. She'd have received the same criticism that skeptics give the scientists who get positive results. They just said, well, your bias, your experimenter bias influenced this experiment. And Randi's always doing that. He's saying he did that in that. Randi supervised a famous homeopathy experiment in the 80s, and he came in and he said, well, these guys are all biased, which is why they keep getting these results. As a result, subconsciously, it's affecting the integrity and security of the experiment. Anyway, yeah. But what can I do about that? I couldn't just change my beliefs. All right, so 10 believing, well, 10 not. I argued that in the beginning I had believed in psi, still had got no results, but couldn't prove this against the counter-argument that I'd never really believed at all. It is, I mean, you, as I said to Stefan, you can't go making assumptions about people's subjective opinions. She carries on. However, I did have an idea. There were still things in which I did believe. I could test the tarot. God blimey, she really did get in deep, didn't she? In my preoccupation with everything occult, I'd been reading tarot cards for about 8 or 9 years. They really did seem to work. People told me that I could accurately describe them using the cards, and this was naturally gratifying. I even thought it might have a paranormal basis, so I set about testing the cards, doing readings for 10 people, keeping the procedure as close as possible to normal tarot readings, but isolating myself as the reader from the subjects. They then had to rank all 10 readings to see whether they picked their own more than chance would predict, Blackmore 1983. It worked! The tests were actually significant! You can imagine my excitement. Perhaps I had at last found something. Perhaps there was no psi to be found in the standard laboratory experiments, but something paranormal could appear when conditions were closer to real life. But then I talked to Carl Sargent. He pointed out that all my subjects knew one another. And if they knew one another, their ratings and rankings could not be independent. So I had violated an assumption of the statistical test I was using. This seemed so trivial. Then knowing one another could not help them pick the right reading, could it? No, it couldn't, but this meant that the estimate of probability was inaccurate, and after all, the results were only marginally significant, so I repeated the experiment twice more with subjects who did not know one another. I expect you can predict the results I obtained. Entirely non-significant. You may choose to interpret these results in different ways. Some parapsychologists have claimed that the first experiment found genuine psi, and the later ones didn't. Some on the same attitude, the same novelty, the same enthusiasm that made psi possible, or even that psi itself doesn't like being replicated. That is rather convenient, isn't it? I wouldn't use that argument. But I think I had finally reached a stage where I no longer felt it was worth pursuing such arguments. I chose this point to say, I think that, however many more experiments I do on psi, I'm probably not going to find it. Now we finally come to the questions. What do these negative results tell us? Of course, the one thing they do tell us is that psi... Sorry, the one thing they do not tell us is that psi does not exist. However long I went on looking for psi and not finding it, they could not tell us that. But I found myself simply not believing in psi anymore. I really had become a disbeliever. Like one of these doors with a heavy spring that keeps it closed, my mind seemed to have changed from closed belief to closed disbelief. It's a radical shift, isn't it, you see? But either way, I suffered. There was mental conflict whether I believed or disbelieved. I had many questions. One was this: how far could I generalize these negative results? The situation was the converse of the normal situation in science, when one gets positive results and has to ask how far they can be generalized. Here, I had to ask whether my negative results applied only to those experiments carried out by me at those particular times, or whether they applied to the whole of parapsychology. There is no obvious answer to that question. If one had replicability, one could answer the question, as one does in other areas of science, but without replicability, it's impossible. The next question was, how could I weigh my own results against the results of other people, bearing in mind that mine tended to be negative ones while everyone else's seemed to be positive ones? I had to find some kind of balance here. At one extreme, I could not just believe my own results and ignore everyone else's. Well, the skeptics would say, yes, you do. A skeptic would say, actually, in fact, there would have been an assumption on their part, the reason you're getting these results, Susan, is because your experiments were better than everyone else's. She carries on. That would make science impossible. That is, if one believes one's own results and ignores everyone else. Science cannot predict the results operate unless people generally believe other people's results. Science is and has to be a collective enterprise. At the other extreme, I could not believe everyone else's results and ignore my own. That would be even more pointless. There would have been no point in all those years of experiments if I didn't take my own results seriously. Indeed, it is a fundamental principle in science that one has to take notice of the results one finds. So there is no right answer on how to weigh them up. And these problems are only aspects of the basic dilemma of parapsychology, which is whether to believe or disbelieve in the existence of psi. Either way, I suggest one meets conflict. In the believer's position, one is saying, I believe there is something negatively defined as communication without the use of the recognized senses, or action without the use of the muscles of the body. I have faith that future experiments will find this thing, even though so far they have failed to produce any replicable effect. If one takes this position, then one not only has to accept the open-ended nature of the search, but also one has to face up to the mounting negative results. No. But what about the disbeliever's position? The disbeliever is only saying, I do not believe there is this negatively defined thing. I do not believe the search will be successful. I have faith that all experiments with positive results could be successfully debunked. So the disbeliever is in a kind of mirror image of the believer's position. That's incidentally, I often make that point generally when it comes to skeptics. But of course, one can never debunk all the experiments, and there will always be more in the future. So the search is equally open-minded, and the disbeliever has to take notice of these positive results. I'm thinking particularly of the results of Carl Sargent, Charles Oniton, Helmut Schmidt, and Robert Jahn. I suggest that if we think these can be easily dismissed, then we're only deluding ourselves. One cannot offer simplistic counter-explanations and throw away these results. I'm not saying that these results may not in the future succumb to some normal explanation. They may well do, but at the moment we do not have such an explanation. Whether you are a believer or a disbeliever, you will suffer mental conflict and anguish. So what's the solution? Easy, isn't it? Have an open mind. But human beings are not built to have open minds. If they try to have open minds, they experience cognitive dissonance. Leon Festinger, 1957, first used this term. He argued that people strive to make their beliefs and actions consistent, and when there is inconsistency, they experience this unpleasant state of cognitive dissonance, and they use lots of ploys to reduce it. I have to admit that I have become rather familiar with some of them. First, there is premature closure. You can just pick one theory and stick to it against all odds. But I could not do that after all these years. What could I do? What I could do was only slightly more subtle. That is, I could prefer one theory and ignore the evidence that goes against it. In this way, the believer can dismiss negative results by using all the old arguments. The time, the place, the emotional state, or the vibes weren't right. Or the disbeliever can refuse to look at the positive results. You may think I wouldn't refuse, but I have to admit that when the Journal of Parapsychology arrives with reports of Helmut Schmidt's positive findings, I begin to feel uncomfortable. I'm quite apt to put it away to read tomorrow. Alternatively, one can simply can jump on a simple counter-explanation such as, it's all fraud and delusion. Well, maybe it is, but that too creates dissonance of its own. To go around thinking that everyone is cheating or deluding themselves can turn one into a permanently suspicious and miserable sort of person. Goodness me, she knew Richard D. Hall. And it can damage one's self-esteem. Suggesting that some effect is fraudulent and tracking that down systematically is one thing, but approaching everything one hears about it as though it must be fraud is destructive. There are other cheap ploys. You can decrease the perceived attractiveness of the opposition. The believer can find it easy to put down one famous critic as a dried-up old professor with no real contact with the field anymore, or a more recent one as having shifty eyes and an all-too-bushy beard. Or the disbeliever can dismiss research on the grounds that all parapsychologists are Scientologists, or are too committed to religious beliefs, or are too dreamy-eyed and vague to be doing real science. They do that, I must admit, I've heard that many times. But none of this will really wash, and most of us know it won't. Nevertheless, we go on doing it because it's so very hard to have an open mind. I have said rather a lot about what negative results do not tell us, but is there anything they do tell us? I think we are now in a position to see that there is. I suggest that whenever you start in parapsychology, if you base your research on the psi hypothesis, then you'll be forced to do ever more and more restricted research to back up into ever less and less testable positions and to produce ever more feeble and flimsy buttresses to hold your theory together. In the end, whatever the questions you started with, you are forced to ask more and more boring questions until there is only one question left. Does psi exist? That question, I submit, is unanswerable. This process is not restricted to those who get negative results. Helmut Schmidt is among the best researchers in parapsychology, and he's been forced to ask the question, does psi exist? Charles Oniton is another example. He's working on fraud-proof, fully automated procedures, even though he might prefer, as do most people in parapsychology, to do process-orientated research. As I did when I started out with my question, is ESP like memory? I think that the problem with parapsychology, and it is a problem that starts from the very hypothesis of psi, the structure and definitions of parapsychology are to blame. The negative definition of psi, the 100 years of bolstering failing theories, and the powerful will find something are at fault. They not only force us to ask, does psi exist, but force us to answer in terms of belief. Where there is no rational and convincing answer, belief takes over. And that is why there are two sides and such misunderstanding. Here it seems to me lies the crux. All those negative results teach us only one thing, that we've been asking the wrong question, and the whole history of parapsychology looks like a string of wrong questions. Parapsychology is, if it is based on the psi hypothesis, a magnificent failure, not because psi doesn't exist, but because it asks unanswerable questions. An entirely different aspect of my research was prompted by my personal out-of-body experience. I never entirely forgot it. I went on wanting to understand it, and eventually tried to tackle it directly. The first question I asked was the obvious one. Does anything leave the body in an OBE? This question may seem close to unanswerable. As close to the unanswerable, does psi exist? But I think it is different enough, or perhaps I was just more ruthless in trying to answer it. Well, this is one of the things I should point out that the Monroe Institute specializes in. Many, many others as well. From experience of my own and from reading the literature, I concluded that we do have an answer, and it is no. You may have heard about an isolated incident of an OBE when someone correctly read a 5-digit number, TART 1986, or when a cat responded to its owner's out-of-body experience, Morris et al. 1978. But I prefer to look at the whole body of evidence, see Blackmore 1982. I concluded that they were unreplicable, that these were unreplicable, and that in general we have enough evidence to answer that there is no real evidence for psi in OBE. I should point out incidentally that the 1968 one, TART, I imagine that's Charles TART, about the 5-digit number which someone read in the box. According to the stuff coming out of the Monroe Institute, that did produce a positive result. Anyway, as she carries on. There's no real evidence for psi in OBEs. There is no evidence of anything leaving the body, and there's no evidence of effects caused by out-of-body persons. How long is this now? Bloody hell, it's still. Oh, it's nearly at the end. Right. I think I'm taking a break, actually. The next question I asked was, why does OBE seem so real? The OBE, the out-of-body experience. To someone who has not experienced an OBE, this might seem a silly starting point, but those of you who will probably understand why I asked it, that then set me to ask, why does anything seem real? Here, I provided myself an answer that seems to account for the OBE, Blackmore 1984. Oh, yeah. Very briefly, I argued that the cognitive system cannot make its decision about what is real or out there at the low level of chunks of input. Rather, it makes its decisions at the higher level of global models of the world. That is, it constructs models of the world and chooses one, and only one, as representing the world out there. And yeah, Susan Blackmore's done many videos about her experiments in using rubber hands and things like that. Richard Wiseman's done a few as well. I next had to ask, can this decision go wrong? And the answer is obviously yes. When there is inadequate input, damage to the system, drugs, trauma, or any of the many things that can precipitate OBEs, then it might. But what would happen if it goes wrong? The system loses contact with reality. I would say that a sensible strategy would be to try and replace the lost input model with the next best approximation, one built from memory. And we know a lot about memory models. For example, as Ronald Siegel, 1977, has pointed out, they are often built on the bird's eye view. We know they are schematized, simplified, and often plain wrong. Indeed, they are just like the OBE world. Yeah, again, Robert Monroe has a different view on this and has done similar experiments which have had different results. It's you can look at these up yourself. But you may see things such as the rubber hand experiment, where you have a rubber hand, which like just a model of your hand, and your own hand is hidden, and someone touches your hand at the same time you see someone touching the rubber hand, and after a while you begin to feel as if that hand is your own. I propose that the OBE comes about very simply when the system loses input control and replaces its normal model of reality with one constructed from memory. It seems real because it is the best model the system has at the time, and it is therefore chosen to represent out there. This answers a lot of questions about the OBE, especially about the phenomenology of the experience. It also led to some predictions I've successfully tested. For example, if the OBE occurs when the normal model of reality is replaced by the bird's eye view constructed from memory, then the people who have OBEs should be better able to use such views in memory and in imagery. In several experiments, I found that OBEers were better at switching viewpoints, especially good at imagining scenes from a position above their heads, and were more likely to recall dreams in a bird's eye perspective. I actually had some positive results at last. Blackmore, 1986a, exclamation mark. This theory also led to a new approach to altered states of consciousness in general. So that persistent question, what is altered in the altered state of consciousness? I could now answer that a person's model of reality is altered. I could look at changes induced by medication, drugs, hypnosis, or a mystical experience in terms of the changing model of reality. Blackmore, 1986b. The OBE will then be seen as only one of a variety of experiences that become popular when the input-driven model of reality is lost. Interestingly, this theory treats the OBE as a kind of error of reality modelling, and so, once again, the error can be used to throw light on the normal process at work. But I was only able to come back to this insight once. I had abandoned looking for psi. I was only able to come back to this insight once I had abandoned looking for psi. It wasn't that I rejected the possibility of psi, I had simply ignored it. I mentioned my OBE research only to contrast it with my previous work based on psi. In my early work, starting from the psi hypothesis, I was forced to ask, does psi exist? In this research, I never had to ask it. The other difference is I no longer had to worry about having an open mind. This makes me wonder what it is like in other sciences. Of course, it is important to have a potentially open mind. If one's results show that one's hypothesis is wrong, then one has to be prepared to change it. But that need not happen very often, at least if one's hypotheses are any good at it. It shouldn't. One doesn't have a permanent open mind. And so it was with the Ryobi research. What a relief. I can conclude that all my negative results did teach me something. Or am I perhaps trying to get my 50 cents worth? A few years ago I read an article in the British Psychological Society Bulletin about the Royal Nonsuch of Parapsychology. The author, H.P. Given, 1979, described Mark Twain's wonderful story of cognitive dissonance about the show that never was. Many people were lured into paying 50 cents to see a non-existent show, but instead of decrying the fraud, they went out to persuade others to see it and pay their 50 cents too. Gibson was reminded of this tale, he said, by a conference paper given by a woman who had spent 2 years in fruitless research on parapsychology. He suggested that parapsychology is only kept going by the very human tendency to get one's 50 cents worth, after one has been misled by an unkind fate which has led one into an immense expense of effort in a blind alley. I fought back in print, Blackmore 1979, arguing that I was not just trying to get my 50 cents worth, that I was after the truth and understanding of the nature of life, the universe, and everything. But the problem is that it is very hard to understand the nature of life, the universe, and everything if you start with the psi hypothesis. In the end, I think my negative results told me that the psi hypothesis leads only to unrepeatability. Blackmore 1985. It forces us to ask ever more boring questions, culminating in the question, does psi exist? And to that question there is no obvious right answer. Where there is no right answer, we are in ignorance, and when we are where we are in ignorance, we should do only one thing: have an open mind. But that is too difficult. After all these years of research, I can only conclude that I don't know which is more elusive, psi or an open mind. There's a list of correspondences here. Anything? Let's just see if I can sin any here. If I recognise any of these. I don't actually. Beyond the body, I recognise. That's high. I've heard that. Bloody blah. It's just a list of things here. Okay, so that's the end of the article, which turned somebody into a skeptic. Which will not turn me into a skeptic, I absolutely assure you. It hasn't turned me into a skeptic. Oh God! Oh God! The plural of anecdote is not data. It's good to have an open mind, but don't be so open-minded that your brain falls out. We're all atheists about the old God, the old gods. It's just that atheists go one god further. So I'm back now. I'm back. Sorry, I had a little episode there for a moment. It is a very, very powerful article that has that effect even on me. Even on me. I was, for a couple of seconds there, I actually found myself channeling my inner skeptic. Oh God, I wonder if it'll happen again. Anyway, let's go back to old Molly.
We know from religion that people lie continually about these sorts of things in order to make money. We know that people who claim to be psychics are liars, right? They learn a whole bunch of skills that bamboozle people, and there may be some people who genuinely believe this sort of stuff, but for the most part, there is no proof of the existence of God, yet we have religion. Is everybody lying? Well, yeah, kind of, right? Because they certainly don't believe in God in the same way they believe that their house exists. So, for sure, people will lie continually to gullible people about psychological phenomenon in order to make money. It's how the church makes its money. Of course, fundamentally, it's how the state makes its money. And so lying about phenomenon in order to transfer wealth, we see it all the time in society.
We know we're going to die, and there is a kind of nobility in facing up to a truth, even if it is bleak, and this is the only life we've got.
So it's all about making money. Now it's a scam to make money is a very, very unoriginal and I think deceptive and slanderous. And I think a very easy kind of slanderous statement to make. You know, all psychic mediums are liars. What was it that song goes by, that little beat poem by Tim, what's his name? You know, these people are either lying or mentally ill. That's the sort of Storm, Tim Minchin, the Storm. You know, they'll say things like, "Oh yes, I know someone who's working as a fake medium. They've been doing it for years," and things like that. Richard Wiseman said this in his book, Paranormality. Read my review and read the book as well, of course. But so the question I always ask these people is, well, how do you know? Well, who is this person? Oh, I can't tell you. I'm bound by confidence. You know, if someone like us said something like that, it would be bloody awful. It would be we'd be pounced on for saying something like that. But skeptics get away with it. Also, you know, is skepticism or the skeptic movement not a scam to make money in the same way? Because as you know from my study of the skeptic movement and the way I attend skeptic conferences and events, it's almost like an inverse parallel world of our own, a mirror image of there's conferences, there's books for sale, there's things like that. There's all the things you find at woo-woo UFO Paracon conferences, you find at skeptic conferences. Except skeptic conferences tend to be bigger budgets. I mean, TAM London was by far the highest budget conference I've ever been to. So you could always reverse that whole thing on themselves. Skepticism is big business. But of course it's not true. It's unfair. And it's a cheap shot.
Well, what's more likely? That souls can transubstantiate and mutate between different individuals, that memories can survive the physical death of the body and be transferred in some manner to a new body upon birth, and that certain configurations within the brain are transferred in some parapsychological or paranormal fashion from one generation to the other, or that somebody's lying so that they can make money on the lecture circuit selling their nonsense story to gullible people.
We know we're going to die, and there is a kind of nobility in facing up to a truth, even if it is bleak, and this is the only life we've got.
Well, that's using Occam's razor. He's actually illustrating Occam's razor here. All things being equal, the most likely explanation tends to be the right one. Now, I go into more details about why this is not real, or this is a bad concept in my skeptic video, because the thing is, I don't know, and no one knows the statistics on how often one happens as opposed to the other. Occam's razor, as I explained in my skeptic video, only works for no known systems. I give the example of a radio breaking down. Change the battery before you fiddle with its innards with a screwdriver. But we only do that because we know how a radio works. So we cannot assign a hierarchy of likelihoods to unknown systems, which is what Stefan here is trying to do, and he can't.
What are the odds, right? If we accept parapsychology in the absence of peer-reviewed scientific methodology, then we have to accept religion, and we have to accept Zeus, and we have to accept leprechauns. Why? Because some people, if you pay them, will say that they really believe in these things.
We know we're going to die, and there is a kind of nobility in facing up to a truth, even if it is bleak, and this is the only life we've got.
That is a total non sequitur. I mean, it really is. I mean, that's like saying we have to believe that chocolate is bad for your teeth because pigeons lay eggs. I don't even know where to go I don't have to go any further with that.
And also, I don't live in the woods, right? I mean, if psychic phenomenon had been proven, I think I would have heard about it. In fact, I think we all would have heard about it. It'd be like somebody saying, oh yeah, no, the existence of extraterrestrial intelligence is totally proven. Maybe you just missed C-SPAN that day. You know, it was on at 2 o'clock in the morning, but nobody really showed any interest, right? I mean, of course people would be all over this.
We know we're going to die, and there is a kind of nobility in facing up to a truth, even if it is bleak, and this is the only life we've got.
No, that is not what would happen, Stefan. That's a very naive way of seeing the world and this whole thing and society in general. There are distinct cultural, psychological, economic, and political reasons why that wouldn't happen. I do recommend you watch, or anyone, in fact, watching this video, go and watch my review of the film Discovery. It's called just simply the Discovery Film Review. And I go into that in very, very great detail. Basically, I put forward the idea, which I think is correct, that we can draw parallels between the cover-up of extraterrestrials and free energy and the cover-up of the afterlife. Because it is a cover-up, I believe. or it's an attempt at a cover-up.
Of course there's no such thing as psychic phenomena. I mean, any biologist could tell you that if we had the capacity to achieve psychic communications, why would nature bother giving us mouths and vocal cords?
We know we're going to die, and there is a kind of nobility in facing up to a truth, even if it is bleak, and this is the only life we've got.
Well, okay, that's a good question. That's a valid question. Surely, if this exists, then nature will have evolved to use it. Well, the answer is nature has. I mean, there's examples. I've actually seen a few examples of a study done that suggests that some kinds of birds actually use ESP to navigate. There's lots of mysteries in biology, by the way. Why do humans have different kinds of skin to other animals? Things like that. But there's also anyone who's experienced as a hunter may well have heard of this. Some hunters suggest not looking directly at your prey. If you're stalking a deer with a rifle, make sure you only look at the deer through your peripheral vision, because if you look directly at it, you may find that there's some kind of ESP link occurs. The deer knows he's been stalked and bolts. I'll tell you who talks about this in really great detail, and very, very interesting guy, Rupert Sheldrake. Read his book. What's it called? The Science Delusion, I think it's called. The American publisher didn't have the guts to go with that title, but it's called The Science Delusion in Britain. I think it's called Science Set Free in the States or something. This is also well known in military matters. In the Vietnam War, the Amerindian soldiers who were drafted were allowed to keep their hair long. Now, all other soldiers, when they were recruited, had to cut their hair short. You might have seen that, the opening scene of Full Metal Jacket, where they're all having their hair cut off. The Amerindians were allowed to keep their hair long because apparently the long hair, for some reason, helps them with ESP, which meant they were always put on point whenever the guys were on patrol, and they were going, there's something weird coming up ahead. I'm getting a feeling about we go around the next bend, there's going to be an ambush or something, that kind of thing. So it's absolutely true, Kev. Stefan, you've asked a good question, but there is an answer.
And of course, if you have, as this woman has, spent your whole life taking money from people in order to take them through this past life's journey, well, what are you going to do if it turns out that it's false? Aren't you going to kind of have to give all that money back?
We know we're going to die, and there is a kind of nobility in facing up to a truth, even if it is bleak, and this is the only life we've got.
Well, you certainly have to cease and desist. I don't know whether you'd be legally or morally obliged to pay all the money back. You would certainly have to cease and desist. Now, I hope I'd be honest enough to do that. I hope I'd be honest. If I was in that position, I don't make any money off what I do on the woo-woo side, but I hope I'd be honest enough to do such a thing. But I think the Skeppers need to do the same. They have to commit to doing the same thing and admit they're wrong and make amends in whatever way they can. And I'm thinking specifically of Michael Shermer, who seems to be kind of on the fence right now. I've talked earlier about his the weird things he said a few years ago, which indicated he may be slipping towards the aisle and maybe crossing it. He's done more since. His friendship with Graham Hancock, for example, is very interesting indeed. So if any skeptic is also proved wrong and it changes their mind, unless we all do change our minds, both Skeppers and woo-woos make converts from each other, and they cross themselves. They cross each other on the path from one to the other. You have to be honest enough to admit it, I think, yeah.
Somebody has asked, I would like to hear your opinion on the psychic military experiments, like the soldiers in Fort Bragg, North Carolina, who tried to kill goats by staring at them, and the psychic spying / remote viewing programs. Well, I don't really know anything about that, other than the fact that I don't believe that goats are the most significant danger that Americans are facing. I think that's more sheep, but that's more of a joke about democracy than anything else.
We know we're going to die, and there is a kind of nobility in facing up to a truth, even if it is bleak, and this is the only life we've got.
Yeah, he's right about democracy. What he talked about there is absolutely correct, even though Stefan doesn't know anything about it. This has been studied in great detail. The best known of these is, it's probably actually not the best source, but it's a good start, is John Ronson's The Men Who Stare at Goats, the book. The film with George Clooney is very funny. It's a comedy, but it doesn't really get to the grips of the entire thing. It makes a joke out of what I think is something that should be treated seriously, even though it is quite an amusing film. There was actually a documentary called Crazy Rulers of the World that goes with Ronson's book, which is worth watching. So that is the end of that particular video, that particular audio. We have one more to go. Okay, this is the final little audio of the 4 audios I'm playing on this one. It is going to be a long video, actually. This is program Free Domain Radio program 741. Now, it's actually a 38-minute monologue by Steph. I'm only going to focus on the first 2.5 minutes because that's the only interesting bit, or at least interesting from the point of view of the subject matter and theme of this video.
So, when you hear about religion, what is often talked about is the comfort that is provided by religion. And by that, what is generally meant is there's some woman who's 70 who had a 50-year marriage, and her husband dies, and then she takes comfort, or likes to take comfort, in the idea that she's going to see him again in heaven. And that idea... Oh my God, what a fucking idiot. All right. Sorry about that swearing. That is a guy who just totally jammed into my lane. You know when you see a driver who's just, you can see this from like 100 yards away, that this guy is just a complete moron, just jamming his way across traffic and so on.
We know we're going to die, and there is a kind of nobility in facing up to a truth, even if it is bleak, and this is the only life we've got.
I wonder if that's an angel there sounding their horn and cutting Steph off. But seriously, I mean, you know where I'm going with this, don't you? If you're a regular viewer, you'll know, especially if you've watched my skeptic videos. He's bringing up the argument of wishful thinking. But as I've explained, that wishful thinking argument cuts both ways. Because of MBA, the Materialist Bravery Award, I could just as easily talk about the comfort that disbelief in the afterlife brings you, because you have the comfort of knowing you are superior and you can feel that you are above everyone else. And in fact, the wishful thinking argument would then indicate that if someone proves to you the afterlife is real, you would lose that comfort. You would lose that crutch that holds you up, which is the social status that comes from not believing in the afterlife. I'll go into more detail in my skeptic video.
Superstitious people can't have great relationships. If you're religious, you can't have a great relationship. You can't even have a decent relationship. If you don't even have a good relationship with reality, how on earth can you have a good relationship with the people who inhabit that reality? It's a basic thing that is just not talked about.
We know we're going to die, and there is a kind of nobility in facing up to a truth, even if it is bleak, and this is the only life we've got.
What a load of insulting nonsense that is. What a ridiculous piece of rhetoric. That's actually, it's funny that he says that. It actually indicates quite an adolescent attitude to relationships. In that way, he's rather like Ayn Rand, who, despite her intelligence, actually was many years below her age when it came to relationships, especially sexual relationships. I don't need to comment on anymore how stupid that is, what he said. It really, really is stupid.
So this is generally not... This argument is not brought to bear on the truth value in religion, but the utility value of religion. In other words, people feel sad, they feel lost, they feel lonely, they feel bereft, they feel fear, and therefore they need religion, or they believe in religion, because it provides them some comfort. With the implicit, and frankly sometimes not so implicit, statement that atheists, you damn bastards, are taking away people's comfort, ripping the Band-Aids off their sucking chest wounds, and exposing their tooth nerves to an icy, bitter aluminum wind. And so you should not. It's cruel to take away people's security blankets. It's cruel to take away that which gives them comfort, and therefore you, rat bastard atheist, you lack compassion
for those who need God to give them comfort.
We know we're going to die, and there is a kind of nobility in facing up to a truth, even if it is bleak. And this is the only life we've got.
Really, atheo-skeptico-materialists totally overestimate and misjudge the effect they have on believers. They don't only they fail to understand their own beliefs and their own ideas, as I explained in my skeptic video, but they really have a warped view of their opponents. And what's more, I mean, as I do, I will. There is more. I know I keep repeating this, but I go into much more detail in my skeptic video. I'm not going to repeat myself here. But everything he said about religion or spirituality or the afterlife, etc., is reversible via MBA. I could take his entire statement there and completely turn it on its head, invert the positions, and it would be equally correct. We, the woo-woos, are taking away comfort and everything else and everything they need from the atheo-skeptico-materialists. We're taking away their quest for social status that MBA gives them. And we are a sexual species. We have a sexual market, which, of course, sexual market value is one of Stefan's catchphrases. And lots of other things, I mean, the disbelief in afterlife is so core to some skeptics' identity that if you remove it by proving the afterlife exists, you rip the very heart out of them psychologically. You literally do that. They don't understand. They don't understand that their own position is at least as much wishful thinking as ours. You know, that's the end. Yes. Yes, so that was a very interesting series of audios by Stefan. I'm sorry it's taken me so long to make this video and reply to him. If he's watching, and I know he's watched at least one of my videos, Stefan, thank you for what you do. I mean, as much as I disagree with you, you bring a lot of massive amount of material for me to work with, grist for my mill, and I don't think anyone does it as much as you. And I'll send you another donation when I get the chance. Although if you could get round to somehow getting back on PayPal, that would be very helpful. And as for you, Hapanwo TV viewers, thank you all of you for watching. There will be another video soon, including my first 2022 UFO disclosure video, much belated. Thank you all of you for watching Hapanwo TV. Hospital Reporters, pride and dignity. Stop the New World Order.